So welcome to another edition of the Life Force Health podcast here on Sprecher, or wherever you're listening to that at the moment. You're here with me, Ben Calder, from the Centre for Integral Health in Shrewsbury. And I'm lucky enough today, and really honoured actually, to be joined by Sarah Auger, who is one of the authors in the just released Life After Birth Trauma book. That is a brand new book that's released here at the beginning of April. And available in all your usual book locations. And I was really fortunate enough to be invited by the creators of the book to not only review it ahead of its publication, but to interview and talk to some of the authors involved in it, which is a real treat for me. I've spent a lot of time in my years as a kinesiologist working with ladies who've had birth trauma, working with fertility, working with scar issues, kind of postpartum, and really helping women to move forward and families to move forward following difficult events within birth, really. So Sarah, who is also owns her own business, The Sensory Fairy, which is working with children with special educational needs. Sarah, thank you for joining me today. Hi.
Hi, Ben. It's my pleasure to be here, and thank you so much for inviting me along.
And really, it's my honour to get to talk to some of you amazing and courageous women who have contributed into the Life After Birth Trauma book. So tell me a little bit about how you ended up getting involved in
that. I know Jessica Prime. I've known her for a couple of years now. We met through a networking association, Mums in Business Association. And I regularly chat to Jessica. I've been following last year when she created the Child Author Project, and I became an ambassador for Merseyside. So when she announced last year that she was going to be doing the Life After Birth Trauma book, and she was looking for people to come along to share their stories. I had previously co-authored another book called Mompreneur on Fire 4, where I told a different story of the conception of my twins and, the birth. I wanted to join this project and contribute to this book, to be able to tell a part of the story that people don't know about, they haven't read before, and to share my experiences. So I contacted Jessica, and we went ahead with it, and I joined the other co-authors in producing this very inspirational book.
And it really is that, having been lucky enough to read it ahead of its release date, I can really say how much value and how much wealth of information there is in that, not just from the shared stories, but also from the encouragement, the tips, the support that are in there from all of you as co-authors. So that's really beautiful. And you mentioned there, in the Mompreneurs book, that you talked about a different aspect of the story, the becoming pregnant with the twins, and from the way I read that in the Life After Birth Trauma, that was quite a surprise, really, wasn't it? So tell me a little bit about what happened in there.
Well, do you mean with the pregnancy with the twins?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I, about 10 years, well, my son's going to be 14 now. I always knew that I wanted more than one child. I've got 3 sisters, and, we used to bicker and fight, but it was nice to have those my sisters. So I knew that I didn't want my son to be an only child. And we've discussed having children, and then we had my son. And then my partner decided he didn't want any more children. Me being quite the stubborn person I am, ended our relationship. And it was always still in my mind that I am going to have another child. So I was single. I decided that I wanted another child. I was recently diagnosed back then with a pituitary tumour that made me infertile. So it was going to be really, really difficult for me. So I went to the infertility clinic, I actually got a sperm donor, and we did it a different kind of way. I lost a lot of friends because of it, because they disagreed with the whole process.
Sure.
But it's what I wanted to do. It was quite important for me to add to my family, and I didn't want being single to stop me from doing that.
Sure.
It didn't work. It really didn't work. Myself and the donor were friends. And then I had a procedure in the November of 2014. The consultant that I can't go through any more heartbreak. I don't want to continue anymore. And then in December, I'd been having some complications from the procedure. So I was booked in for an ultrasound scan, and I was pregnant.
Wow.
With one baby.
Okay.
With one baby. There were a few issues of bleeding, so I'd gone back to have more scans. I had 3 scans before they realised that it was twins. And, well, that was, I swore, like, you are bloody joking, you are joking. She said, no, we're not allowed to joke about these things. And I was like, oh. It was a shock. I was petrified. I was scared, because I'd always had in my mind that if I have another child, I'm going to have one more child. Mm-hmm. How am I going to breastfeed 2 children? How am I going to change their nappies? Am I going to be able to manage having 2 babies and, a 9-year-old? But after a few days, after that had died down, I was so excited. I felt like I'd been blessed, that I'd been infertile. I wasn't able to get pregnant. And now I've been given 2 babies instead of 1. So I was absolutely made up. Yeah.
And then what happened as that pregnancy continued, and this is really your story in the life after birth trauma. So what happened in a kind of a relatively, shall we say, PG version of that? How did that go for you? How was the pregnancy and then the birth?
The pregnancy was short, and it was quite horrific, to be honest. At 12 weeks, I'd gone for a private scan to see the babies, and they were fine. But I'd been bleeding a little bit, so I went to A&E. And A&E, whilst I was in A&E, I hemorrhaged, and I thought that was the end of the pregnancy. But an hour later, I had a scan, and I've got a scan picture of both of the babies with the hands up waving at me. It was so beautiful. But the rest of the pregnancy was very worrying, because I was still bleeding.
Yeah.
Towards 18 weeks, 19 weeks, the bleeding had stopped. But I just felt very uncomfortable. Everybody was telling me, it's because you're carrying twins. Mm-hmm. But I just knew that something was... I just had this feeling that something wasn't right, something was wrong. But I suppose everybody who's pregnant always thinks there's, something's wrong. They're always a little bit anxious. So I put it down to just that's what happens to everyone. And then at 22 weeks, my waters broke. So from 22 weeks up to 28 weeks when the twins was born, I spent that whole time in hospital, away from my son. It was really an upsetting time. I had to sign forms every week with a new plan of what to do if the twins were born early.
Sure.
And the really hard decision I had to make at 22 weeks, I had all of the facts. I'd spoken to, the neonatal paediatrician, was that if my children were born, the tubes would be too hard to breathe. So I made the decision that if they were to be born that early, just to give them pain relief. But when I reached 23 weeks, they were happy to help, which shocked me, because you hear that they won't help till 24 weeks. But this hospital, they were prepared to help at 22 weeks. So, I was really quite impressed with that.
Yeah.
At 23 weeks, I made a decision, if they are born early, please help them. But they both hung on until 28 weeks. And 3 days before they were born, everything kind of went wrong. I hemorrhaged again, and I was left 3 days before they were born. Mm-hmm. Obviously, there's a lot more to this story, and it's in the book.
Yeah, sure. Read the book, everybody.
Definitely read the book, yeah. Otherwise, when my twins were born at 28 weeks, they were in a very critical condition. We were both taken to intensive care. My daughter, Tilly, who was the smallest, was born at £2.5, and my son, Teddy, was born at £2.12.
Yeah.
And Teddy was in an even more critical condition. They tried different ventilators. He'd hemorrhaged quite a lot himself. He'd had 3 blood transfusions. And I met him, and I held his hand, and he'd had a bleed on the brain. And they had been resuscitating him already in the 3 hours. And then when they went to go and resuscitate him again, I just told them to stop.
Yeah.
Told them to stop, to take all the wires off him and to pass him to me.
Yeah.
And so he passed away on my chest.
Yeah.
Yeah. And my daughter, she lived, and she was in intensive care for 9 weeks.
Yeah. And the birth at that point had actually been prompted by a consultant at the time deciding that you'd actually had a placental tear, and that emergency C-section was essential right at that point as well. So very unexpected, and very sudden, and not really a lot of time to do anything other than agree to go along with that, I guess.
Yeah. On the Tuesday night, I had started bleeding very, very heavily. So I was taken around to the delivery suite. Earlier that afternoon, I'd spoken to the consultant and told him that I was very worried because there was baby poo coming out. And I was dismissed, told that everything was fine. If he thought that the babies were at risk, he would deliver, but he didn't think they were at risk. And then that happened about 8 o'clock at night. I was taken delivery suite. And then for the next 3 mornings, the Wednesday and Thursday, I saw that same consultant who examined me and still kept saying, no, it's not too much bleeding. The babies are fine.
Yeah.
And then on the Friday morning, a new consultant came in, examined me and said, no, you've had a placental abruption and we need to take you to theatre.
Yeah. Which is interesting as well, because certainly one of the themes that I see in the book is that for women who are in their first pregnancy, there seems to be an almost automatic nature of dismissal that is taking place. You don't know your body, you don't know what's taking place. But as this wasn't your first child as well, and still not being listened to, I mean, how was that for you?
I think it wasn't my first pregnancy. Yeah. I did meet a lot of ladies in the ward who it was their first pregnancy, and they were dismissed a lot. Yeah. I think it's because this is my first twin pregnancy. So I would complain that I was in a lot of pain.
Yeah.
And I was dismissed by saying, it's because you're not used to carrying twins. This is your first twin pregnancy, so it's perfectly normal. So I was treated as if it was my first pregnancy, because it was a twin pregnancy. It was very, very frustrating because I knew that something wasn't right.
Yeah.
But there's nothing I could do about it. They wouldn't listen to me.
And sort of following the pregnancy as well, and the kind of the immense sadness of Teddy passing and you being there for that, and then Tilly, I understand, was a neonatal then for 9.5 weeks. So what support were you receiving during that 9.5 weeks?
None. I'll be honest, none. When they were born on the Friday, I kept Teddy with me in a cool cot 5 days, and I was discharged on the Wednesday. Family had been there, over the weekend for me and such. Friends hadn't been there for me. Friends kind of backed away as if they didn't know what to say or what to do.
Yeah.
I was discharged on the Wednesday. I went to the GP on the Thursday morning and asked her to sign me off fit to drive 6 days after my cesarean. And she had me do a few exercises and I was signed fit to drive.
Wow.
I think I didn't feel any pain from the cesarean because my mind was completely somewhere else. My son had just died and my daughter was in a critical condition.
Yeah.
So the pain had been put to the side. So I was driving myself to the hospital, which is half an hour away, twice a day, 6 days after having a cesarean.
Yeah, wow.
The hospital wouldn't give me a room to stay in. They said the rooms were for people further away, like Manchester or London. My health visitor was absolutely wonderful. Mm-hmm. She had been in to visit me whilst I'd been in hospital for the 6 weeks prior. She was wonderful. She came to see me. She took me in touch with people. I had Sure Start breastfeeding team came in to see me, and they kept in touch and kept coming in, not just to help me express and learn how to breastfeed, but they were there for me to cry. Yeah. The neonatal nurses and the doctors were absolutely wonderful.
Yeah.
I can't fault the neonatal doctors and the nurses at all. They are just the most amazing people. But as for other support, there wasn't any. It was financial support when you have a premature child is non-existent, and it costs a lot of money when you have a premature child. You have to travel back to the hospital and back twice a day, pay the tunnel fares, your fuel. You have to eat out at the hospital because when you wake up in the morning, I just wanted to get my son to school. I didn't have time to be preparing food to take with me, so I would eat at the hospital. We ate takeaways for 9 weeks of an evening. It was a lot of money, and plus I had a funeral to pay for.
Yeah, sure.
Because a lot of people assume that children's funerals are free, which a lot of funeral directors won't charge for a funeral, but you have to actually pay about £260 for the plot.
Yeah.
So, £260 at that time was a lot of money, so there wasn't any financial help. So I don't feel like there was enough support, really, to be honest.
Yeah, sure.
And there was only so much that the nurses can do.
Sure, and just that breadth of support as well. I mean, not having anybody to drive you, not having anybody to help significantly with the childcare for your son, not having any financial support in there, not really having a decent selection of emotional support in a lot of ways. I mean, to be grieving, to be going through that whole process as well, while still not sure what's going to be happening with Tilly, being able to try and care for your son. I mean, there are multiple aspects in here where there's incredible stress going on, and you're kind of expected to sail through the middle of all of that and somehow still be a responsible and good parent on top of it all as well, which is, this is what I find about the book. It's mind-blowing.
Yeah, it's very stressful. To have a baby is a really, really happy time.
Yeah.
But can you imagine losing a child and having a child on the same day? you've got those both complete opposite emotions. How do you deal with them both at the same time? And then my eldest son at the time as well, whilst I was pregnant, had lost his vision.
Wow.
So he'd been an older hay, and he was on a chemotherapy treatment as well. So he was having, whilst we were going to see my daughter in intensive care every day, we were also going to another hospital each week for him to have more tests.
Wow. So the very fact that you're even still here is incredible.
Yeah. And one thing I do say is that grief is hard. It never disappears. It really doesn't. You know, it's been nearly 5 years now and it's still very raw, but you can't let that grief define the rest of your life. Yeah. You have to find a way to live your life around that. Yeah. And that's what I've done in the last 5 years. I've found ways to work around that. I've found how to be happy again and realise that I am allowed to be sad.
Yeah, sure. Which people often don't really think about. It is okay to grieve, and whatever time period that takes, wherever that pops up, that's totally okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what was it like for you in those first couple of years as well? After Tilly comes out of neonatal, you have her home. You know, again, reading in the book, that was a very challenging time for you then as well, still.
Yeah, it was extremely difficult. Those first few weeks at home, the neonatal nurse would come to the house every day, which was really hard. And I was actually breastfeeding at that time, and I was told not to express into a bottle to add a fortifier in so that she would gain more weight. I was told that my milk wasn't fat enough to start drinking McDonald's milkshakes more.
Jeez.
I was put under a lot of pressure, and at one point I was told that if I don't give my daughter the milk with the fortifier in, then I was being neglectful.
Wow.
And just after 9.5 weeks to be told that's utterly heartbreaking.
Yeah.
So I made the decision to stop breastfeeding and bottle fed.
Yeah.
Which, if I'd have had more support at the time, I wouldn't have done that.
Yeah.
I also spent the first 2 years not just thinking that my daughter would die. I was expecting her to die. I knew that she was not going to live because my son had died. She was very poorly. She had chronic lung disease. She had had a hole in her heart which had closed by itself. She'd had blood transfusion. She had a very weak immune system. She would pick up cold really easily. She was in and out of hospital every couple of weeks. And I felt every day I was just expecting that day to be the last day with her.
Yeah.
I thought she's going to be taken away from me. And I spent every single day for 2 years believing that she was going to die.
And such a stressful state for you as a person to be moving through that as well, and to even find the motivation every day when you get up to do the things that need doing, again, caring for the family in whatever way, when that's the backdrop that you're holding on to in your own psychology there as well.
Yeah, it's very, very, very difficult. But the turning point came when she needed an operation because her adenoids and her tonsils were extremely large and they were blocking her airways, so she couldn't breathe properly. So she had an operation and she survived. And to me, that was, well, actually, she's just had this operation that they'd been putting off for a few months because she was too small.
Sure.
So we went to the operating theatre and I was expecting her to die.
Yeah.
But she lived. And it was a massive turning point for me then, because I thought, right, she's been through this operation and she's lived. So actually, she's strong enough to live. So that's when my thinking started to change.
That's amazing.
It took 2 years, yeah.
And how has this kind of experience affected how you view medical services and the natal services that have been provided for you? How's that kind of left that with you?
I don't trust anybody.
Sure.
I don't. I do a lot of my own research. I don't just trust what one doctor might tell me. I will ask for a second opinion. I will do a lot of research myself, and go back with, if I don't feel that something is right, I will go back and tell them it's not right, and I will demand that they do further tests. My trust in these people has almost disappeared because I wasn't listened to. People made mistakes. Not just one person made mistakes. Quite a few people made mistakes. And they've made mistakes not just with me, but with my eldest son and then the twins as well. But even after Tilly had come home, that first year and a half, she was ill for 16 weeks. And we were dismissed by one hospital. She'd lost out what was wrong with her. They also realised that none of her vaccinations had ever worked and that she'd had whooping cough. She was very, very poorly. But the other hospital told us that it was just a viral infection. When you've had people make so many mistakes, it's very hard to trust somebody. It is.
So what advice would you be giving to anybody planning pregnancy, to expectant mothers? What would your kind of key do's and don'ts be that would be right at the top of your list?
The do's are to speak to people who have gone through pregnancy and given birth before. They don't just have to be people that you know. There's a lot of really amazing support groups. We all want our pregnancies and births to be absolutely perfect. But I do think that it's a hard topic, this, but I think we need to be aware of things that can go wrong during birth. I'm not talking about your child dying specifically. I mean, I know a lot of people who suffer PTSD because they weren't expecting the birth that they had. A lot of people think that you make a birth plan and you're going to be able to follow that birth plan, but actually you need to make a backup plan as well. So make a backup plan. Try and get as much support as you can as well. And always trust your instincts. Even if it is your first pregnancy, trust your instincts.
So one of the things that down here in Shrewsbury, we have a fabulous lady called Sue Barber, who's a natural birth specialist, and Sue and I have had a useful working relationship for a number of years now. And one of the terms from her that I really love is that birth is not a medical event. Birth is a natural event, and if we need medical intervention at certain times, that's one thing. But really, we should be understanding the naturalness of birth and how, the human race reached a rather large proportion of people well ahead of any modern medicine. So, we know as a natural event, it can be very successful. And yes, we've had high birth mortality rates in the past and other factors, but we still manage to be on the increase rather than on the decrease through that all. So, for me, I always try and encourage whenever I'm working with expectant mothers, birth is a natural event. You don't have to make it a medical event. But again, it's that research, it's that understanding your options. And again, I think the Life After Birth Trauma book gives such a beautiful set of resources. There's so many good links in there to people that can support and characters in there who have now gone ahead and made fabulous careers out of actually being able to support women who have had situations similar to yours and difficulties. And I think that's a critical thing to increase the awareness of for new mothers.
Yeah. I think you've just mentioned about natural births. I would have loved to have had a home birth. even with my first son, I was only 28, but I was told that I was at high risk because of my age at 28. A lot of people feel pressured into accepting to be induced.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people, I felt, when I was pregnant with my first son, I was in labour. I had been induced. I was in labour, and I remember the midwife saying, "Right, we're going to break your waters now." And I didn't question it. It just happened, and it was horrendous. And I think now, because it was my first pregnancy, well, that's just what they do.
Yeah.
But I really wish they hadn't broke my waters, because I was managing for the previous 10 hours absolutely fine until that point. It became so intense. So, if I'd have been allowed to have a natural birth with the twins, if everything had gone okay, that's one thing that I wouldn't have, allowed was my waters to be broken. I would, want it to go the way I decide, not other people.
And how have you felt that being a contributor into the book, how has that been a contribution to you? And what do you see as the value of this to other mothers and other mothers-to-be as well?
It's a great value to me. By talking about my experience, by sharing my experience, it's a part of my healing process. I'm still keeping, although my son's passed away, I'm still keeping his memory alive. Being able to talk about it is, it makes me happy. In the beginning, I used to cry a lot, but it's nice to talk about everything that happened. And my daughter now is thriving; she's absolutely amazing. So, something really amazing has come from it all.
Yeah.
I think it's important to share our stories with other people as well. Not just mums, but dads as well, because dads are often left on the other sides of the room and nobody thinks about their emotions and everything. It's all just focused on the mum. So it's good. I think we have got a couple of dads in the book.
There are
as
dad
well.
stories in the book, as well, which again, very moving, very powerful.
Yeah, and it's wonderful to read, their side of it. It helps other people to come to terms with if something similar has happened to them, to realise they're not the only one.
Yeah.
And actually, well, if she's still grieving 5 years on, I'm allowed to grieve 5 years now, as if you're not over that.
Yeah,
so
sure.
people are put under pressure like that. But by sharing my story, I hope to inspire people, and I hope to let people know that it's all right to grieve, it's all right to be sad, and you know what, it's okay to be happy as well.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. And I think if there's one thing that really comes through in so many of the stories in the book, is that it's okay to really acknowledge the heartache, the pain, the difficulty, and simultaneously be grateful, be happy, to enjoy the fact that there has been, in most cases, a successful outcome. Ultimately the lives of the children have continued, and that there is support. There is a way of doing this that can be healthy, that can be kind, that can be an integration between conventional medical, non-conventional, to honour mothers, to be able to take on medical advice. It's not that it's a black and white either or, one way or another. There's actually this great conglomerate of possibility that's in there, and everybody needs to kind of navigate their own way through it based on what is happening.
Yeah, it's not just written in a textbook, this is how it happens. There's so many different ways. People may choose to go and have their child in a river, which is, I've seen, absolutely wonderful. Oh, do you know what? Yeah, amazing. And somebody might choose to go into hospital.
Yeah.
Somebody might grieve for 1 year. Somebody might grieve for 10 years.
Yeah.
And both of those are absolutely fine.
Yes.
We all deal with things completely different, and that is absolutely fine.
Yeah, always. Sarah, thank you so much. It's been an absolute honour to speak to you today and to talk to you about your story and about your part in the Life After Birth Trauma book. And it's been great for me to do this. And if you would like to connect with Sarah, you can go to her website, thesensoryfairy.co.uk, and you can find her in Facebook as The Sensory Fairy and on Instagram as The Sensory Fairy as well. Easy theme to find there. And I'm sure she'd be more than happy, specialising in special educational needs for children. So I'm sure there's a whole wealth of experience and other things that we could spend hours talking about as well, Sarah. So thank you very much for joining.
Thank you so much for having me, Ben. It's been wonderful to talk to you. No and problem. Remember, everybody go and buy the book, very inspirational stories.
Definitely, absolutely. And we'll have links into all of Sarah's pages and into the Life After Birth Trauma book. Those will all be in the description for today's podcast. So, Sarah, thank you very much for joining me. Thank you, everybody, for listening on this Life Force Health podcast today. And this will be one of 3 interviews that we're doing around the book. So keep on checking back onto the podcast and you'll see the others that will be there as well. So thanks, everybody, and we'll look forward to speaking to you again soon.